is a vocation rooted in hopefulness. As teachers, we believe that learning is possible, that nothing can keep an open mind from seeking after knowledge and finding a way to know. So first of all, I think it's important just to take that word of hopeful. Above all, feminist pedagogies are hopeful that we can make a difference to people's lives and that we can make a difference to the world. They also open up new ways of knowing. And often feminists are interested in experiential ways, situated, embodied and relational ways of knowing. And I think the wonderful opening to this session today is such a good example of that, where we're focusing on our bodies and emotions and what the people in the room are bringing to this learning experience. So my feeling about feminist pedagogies is that they're hopeful, they aim for transformation, they're contextualised, they begin with where we're situated. So we're thinking about what transformations do we need for our students, our communities, our societies. They're responsive to our learners and their needs in our spaces of learning. They're very personal. So starting with, who am I as a feminist? What are my ideals? How have my experiences shaped me as a teacher? What do we hope to achieve here together? They are political, inevitably. We aim to critique, transgress, disrupt and interrupt the status quo and some of the settled or comfortable ways of doing things. And they're very compassionate. They incorporate values of caring for others. And it's also extremely important to practice self-care because feminist pedagogies, they can be difficult in the environments in which we work. It can be difficult sometimes to hear how other people are feeling, to carry those emotions and to hold that space. So we really do have to practice self-care. So a few things I want to share and which we can explore further are a few key principles that are important to me. So thinking about power dynamics in the learning space as well as in the wider society, thinking about who is in the room and what kinds of forms of power are operating and how can we disrupt and manage that. Thinking about positionality, our own positionality and that of the students, and being open and honest about the privileged positions we might be coming from and different positions that people occupy in the classroom. Criticality, of course, is so important. We don't necessarily want learners who are obedient and don't ask questions and go along with everything that we say. We want them to be questioning of us, of each other, of the world, and to be really engaged in some of the issues we're exploring. So relationality is important, building really good pedagogical relationships as much as possible, bringing ethics of care into this situation, noticing what students' needs are and encouraging them to notice each other as well, and to build up good, connected, collaborative ways of working. Reflexivity is extremely important, encouraging students to get into habits of reflecting, thinking about why they're responding to certain things in certain ways. Where do their ideas come from? What's important to them? And to help facilitate a developing self-awareness. And of course, ultimately, encouraging transformation. What are different ways of changing the world? We don't just want to sit around talking about all of the inequalities and problems there are in the world. We need graduates who are willing to go out, take risks, find solutions to problems, stand up, make themselves heard, and work collaboratively towards changing things for the better. So why are feminist pedagogies important? Well, it's probably quite obvious to say some of the continuing oppressions of patriarchy, capitalism, coloniality and militarism in the world, which lead to experiences of marginalisation, inequity, indignity, violence, discrimination, devaluation, injustice, and the destruction of our environment. I think certainly in the European and US context, we're seeing a lot of rising hate and reactionary discourses. And this includes the closing down of gender studies courses, with feminism and gender being positioned as dangerous ideologies, coming with lots of misconceptions, which is really important to address with students. So one of my starting points is, what qualities do we need to nurture in our students to be able to deal with the world we live in? And here are just a few of the qualities that I'm hoping to nurture in the learners I'm working with. We have a lot of challenges as feminist practitioners in the UK context. So it's not easy trying to teach in these ways, but it's still worth trying. And what's really important is building up our solidarities with other feminists and supporting each other and sharing strategies and having each other's backs when things get tough. So we lived in an era where higher education is very marketised and students being positioned as passive consumers. There is still a lot of structural inequalities. Some of the hate discourses find their way onto campus, including violence. We're also in an era in the UK where the government has just announced that in primary and secondary education, no one is allowed to critique capitalism. So I think that we absolutely have to make the most of our opportunity in university education to get students asking questions, critiquing and thinking about these issues, because they may not get an opportunity before they come to us. So the teaching context I'm talking about is actually from my last institution. I just recently moved universities. So I was leading a course for students which prepared them for university, and it was called a foundation course, with a real mix of disadvantaged and privileged learners, a higher proportion than average of students with disabilities, and about a quarter of our learners from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. The course had a lot of social justice orientated content. It was about policy context, welfare and wellbeing across the life course. And students go on to study and work in a whole host of different disciplines. It's important to make clear that some of the reflections on these slides, I did get ethics approval and permission from the students to share these reflections and write about them. So first of all, in terms of power dynamics, I think it's important to think about both teacher to student and student to student power dynamics, and how power plays out in the way that we use our learning space. Who gets to speak, who's listened to, who's in control, who is valued, whose knowledge is considered important. And I've shared a picture of a very kind of conventional way of teaching, with a student, with a lecturer dominating, taking up the floor, being the person who's heard and who's visible, often rendering students passive. So I think a starting point is to work around how can we use our spaces in different ways to enable students to contribute the knowledge and experiences they bring. So I've thought about rearranging spaces, really being present with students, providing opportunities to share, getting students to take responsibility and co-create knowledge and co-create the ways in which we use that space. And also modelling for them that I'm willing to share, I'm willing to fail, I don't know everything, sometimes I'm vulnerable, and being in that role of a learner so that we're learning together. I think, as I mentioned before, it's really important to think about positionality. Being very clear about my own positionality, getting students to reflect on their advantages and disadvantages from their lives, really introducing that concept of intersectionality so they can start to think through multiple forms of oppression and lots of different experiences. And I think it's about bringing lots of different stories and experiences into the room and into the teaching materials as much as possible, and trying to centre the voices of people from marginalised backgrounds. Criticality, of course, involves encouraging questioning of everything and really being very careful about the sources that they are drawing on, especially in these days of social media, which can be very influential on people's opinions. So really maximising opportunities for discussion and debate, sometimes getting students to role play and take different sides to an argument that they wouldn't usually take, and really thinking about some of the impact of wider power structures on people's lives. In terms of relationality, this is about valuing care and empathy in our learning spaces and our approach to the world. So recognising interdependencies, connectedness, commonalities, and our shared humanity, and resisting competitive individualism. So for students, it's important to create opportunities for meaningful connections and for sociality and for getting out of the conventional learning spaces as much as possible. It really means being present in the moment and listening and sharing our stories and experiences. Trying to get students to take responsibility for creating safer spaces where it's safe for people to speak up. And trying to meet learners where they are and respond to their needs. So this concern for well-being is the cornerstone really of feminist pedagogy. And there's a quote here from Bell Hooks, who talks about the importance of teaching in a manner that respects and cares for the souls of our students, if we're to provide the necessary conditions where learning can most deeply and intimately begin. So I won't dwell on this bit, but this is about the importance of reflection and how I build this into teaching. Here we go. And finally, it's so important to think about transformation, building in opportunities for problem solving, asking students what they would do if they were in power, how would they do things differently, getting them to brainstorm solutions to problems, and using current examples to help bring the learning to life, as well as examples from local communities or from learners' communities. So bringing the world into the learning spaces and highlighting opportunities to make a difference. So if students are interested in engaging in activism, we can be role models and we can help open up different opportunities for that. And sometimes even it can be an activity that we can do in the classroom. So for example, my students were very distressed when they were learning about how much child poverty there is in the UK. And so we had an activity where we wrote to the government and all of the political leaders, and I shared all of the students' ideas. And creating forums as well to share current issues, what's going on in the news, signing petitions and getting involved in local communities. So if we can bring activism into our teaching, this is one way of making a difference and empowering students to feel like their voices can be heard and they can make a difference in the world. So I'd like to end again with bell hooks because basically her book is like my Bible. So Bell says, the academy is not paradise, but learning is a place where paradise can be created. The classroom with all its limitations remains a location of possibility. In that field of possibility, we have the opportunity to labour for freedom, to demand of ourselves and our comrades an openness of mind and heart that allows us to face reality, even as we collectively imagine ways to move beyond boundaries to transgress. This is education as the practice of freedom. And I can't top that, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. And I really love that you started and ended with the Queen herself, bell hooks. Thank you so much. And so much, such a rich presentation, actually. And the one thing that for me is threaded throughout our conversation since the morning is this idea of power and challenging power in our own little spaces, in our classrooms, in our faculties. And I guess like one of the things I'm thinking through now is, as students, as most of us are students here, how do we challenge our lecturers, for example, to think differently, to approach the work differently? How do we bring this activism into the classroom? Because we ourselves, we also hold knowledge. And how do we open that space? Those are just some of the questions that kind of going through my head at the moment. But I'd like to open the space for people to kind of reflect on not only the conversation that you had with your partner earlier, but after seeing this very rich contribution by Charlotte, I'm very interested in particular to hear from the students what really struck you about it, and if you have anything to kind of reflect on.
Yes, and I'll just say quickly, I did mean to say at the end of that, I was going to open up some questions to you and ask what feminist pedagogies might look like or feel like in your context, and what sorts of learning spaces do you have to work with, and what would you really like to see change? What strategies could be used?
Yeah.
So can I start off by just saying I feel like Charlotte's presentation is like so relevant to what we spoke about in our breakaway session, and like some of the stuff she says in a different way or in a different context, but I think fundamentally a lot of it is about power and sort of like empowering students, and not just empowering students, like everyone needs to be empowered, but making sure that different students who may be actively disempowered in the education system also get to a level playing field and learning field. So like Dikeledi and I were just discussing the question of like epistemology and knowledge, and how within the academic system, the longer you're there, the more you realize that not everyone's knowledge is like valued equally, and different types of knowledge from different people are treated differently. So you have students sort of being treated like these empty vessels that you just pour knowledge into. And then students also feel like the classroom is just a place where you just extract, like Dikeledi used the word that we like extract, kind of like the way like companies would like extract minerals from like the ground, and then we go and we take the knowledge, we process it somewhere else, and then we go do something with it, but we don't give back in the very same environment. So it's not like a reciprocal thing where there's a dialogue in the class. It's just like, okay, this information has been poured into me and I'm going to pour it into the next person. And as a student, I feel like a lot of my professors struggle with pluralistic economics, teaching economics in different ways, because they want to do the pouring in that was done to them. So they've already been filled to the brim. They've gotten all of this stuff poured into them, and now they want to pour in the exact same knowledge as us. And when you tell people, no, we need to constantly be changing how we teach and what we teach, it comes as a shock to the system, because for so many generations, it was just pour in and then you pour into the next person. So having like a type of learning system that doesn't perpetuate itself like that might be helpful in also correcting wrong, like plain out wrong and harmful practices and forms of knowledge. Interrogating what we're teaching, interrogating what we're learning may help to disrupt some of the things that have been perpetually going on, things that, for example, in the South African education system, you can trace them directly from the apartheid era or directly from the colonial era before that, that the format of teaching, the fact that we use the type of lecture system that comes from the UK or the US, that doesn't just come naturally, it comes from the colonial process. And we find that if you're a person who comes outside of that and you kind of prefer a more dialogue style of teaching, like the thing that you spoke about having students, disrupting the lecturer sitting at the front, students sitting just watching, that's something where as Africans we have discussion forums like indabas where you would typically have people not sit in like one person's there presenting and the others are listening, but you sit together with people, and that's how people talk. It's a discussion and everyone feels valued in that forum, whether it's the teacher or the students. But coloniality teachers, you have the person who's the expert sitting in front of everyone else giving the knowledge, and there's nothing that they can learn, there's no input you can give them. So I think a lot of what Charlotte said like relates so much to what we said in our session.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. And that image that Charlotte shared of that man standing in front of the huge classroom, that really triggered me, because that was my university. And thinking critically or challenging the lecturer only happened like 5 minutes after his 2-hour presentation. And so, yeah, we need to open space for students to also kind of engage, kind of break those hierarchies. Thank you, Neil. I know people are just dying. Yes, Digadini.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. You know, I think also even the architecture, it's very problematic in a sense that it does recreate and reproduce these hierarchies, that you have a lecturer standing in front and everybody else. And you know, in most cases, I tend to have this preference for like a flat floor kind of a classroom, whereas in that space, you're then able to actually sort of design the structure to be in a circle, right? So students sit in a circle, and by the way, this for me has only been possible with training that I do outside of the university. Within the university, the structures is complete, like it tends to be different because I find university lectures already structured in that way. But I think that's one of the things that even how we sit in the classroom actually can help in diffusing power structures and the hierarchy in itself. And also you as a facilitator, you as a lecturer sitting down with the students. So for me, that's one of the things that I've been doing as a lecturer, that's, you know, so basically sit down with the students and have all of us find a way. But to be honest with you, just to share with my experience just this year, the teaching experience, I mean, the personal I've already shared, but the teaching experience has also been, I realized how I've backtracked completely from like feminist care. I've not been able to do that. I have not been able to, because I also read some of the emails, like when you know, having conversations with the students, particularly, I mean, myself in political economy class, which has 180 students. You know, with one hand I have a baby in my hand, and then the other one I'm typing, and some of the emails that I'm typing don't even have like dear, so it's always a reply of, okay, please submit there. Like there really wasn't care. There was no, it was you know? So all of these things this year have just been also horrible. I think in terms of, you know, any form of sort of feminist pedagogy, that for me on a personal level, I'll just be honest in that sense. And the fact that everything has been online with 180 students, you don't also know what is happening with the students. Also, you don't know when you're asking students, how are you, if you're going to trigger the student to, you know, sort of start pouring out and in ways that you will not also be able to assist, right? So that was the other thing that I wanted to ask you, Charlotte. So in that case, I mean, how do we balance care in this context, whereby sometimes if you were to ask a student, how are you doing? And they start literally, because I mean, most people were not doing okay. Like most people are not doing okay, you know? And also when you do ask the students, how are you doing? And they begin to respond, you have all these other deadlines, you have all these other responsibilities. So the response will be, oh, I am sorry. I hope you'll get better. Or maybe, I mean, like it has been so impersonal for me this year. It literally has been horrible at that level in my experience as a lecturer, that feminist teaching has been somewhat really different, like difficult to do. You know, and in that case, so consequently, what then happened is I've found myself having like sort of in a moral conundrum or moral dilemma, in a sense of like asking myself, I mean, if I'm permitting this, is this okay, right? Am I sort of breeding something that is problematic for the students? For example, instead of having deadlines, I've literally been allowing students to submit continuously. Even now, the semester has ended, but I'm still allowing students to. And also in certain instances, I'm like realizing that, but here this is kind of like plagiarism, you know, I don't know, it seems like, you know, and I'm at that level where I'm like, if the student had insufficient time to be in class, you know, possibly that would not have happened, right? So do I mark that down, and considering that also possibly the students are going through the most, and if you fail amidst the pandemic, which is very depressing, my contribution to a student's challenges, wherever they're going through, it's literally, there's been all of that I've been grappling with, and I'm hoping maybe you could also advise in the end, because like it has been tough at the professional level. It has really been tough. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Criticality, and I'll give Charlotte an opportunity to respond. I just want to get a few more questions and reflections, if that's okay.
Yeah. Are you keeping a note of all the questions? I'm trying to keep a note to try and respond to them all.
Yeah. Yanda, I saw your hand was up. Oh, no?
No, it wasn't up. Sorry.
Bonolo, I see, do you want to kind of share what you just put down? Come.
All right, like, I don't know, I think while Charlotte was sharing, like something, it redefined feminism for me personally. And I think for a lot of people, there's this misconception that like feminism is so unreasonable, it's angry, it's so detached from what's actually happening on the ground. And when she spoke about it, it's like when we're always talking about mental health and we're talking about activism and like critique, generally feminism, people critiquing systems that are in place that uphold patriarchy and stuff like that is always seen as something that's so violent. And to hear how holistic it is, not only for the students, but just in general for like teachers, for the entire learning experience that kids have at university or whatever, and research. I think that for me was a refreshing perspective that I've never really received from feminism.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, I just got chills. Woo. Okay. Thank you for sharing, Bonolo. The floor is open for kind of more reflections. I'd love to hear what you guys spoke about in your breakout rooms earlier. Yeah, and it looks like you're talking, but oh, there we go.
Yeah, since you mentioned what we talked about in our breakout rooms rather. So we spoke about engagement and equalization in terms of whereby you are in a space where you can freely engage and feel like no one is judging you in terms of what you are saying, in terms of your opinion. And Tando and I also spoke about inclusive spaces, whereby everyone is included in terms of their disabilities, in terms of how vulnerable you may be, in a space whereby you are not put in terms of a hierarchy, you know, whereby someone is more intellectual than another person. And another thing that is triggering is the concept of power. I feel like power is something that has been very persistent in terms of my university, how lecturers oppress students. There was an encounter, I think first semester, because we're in second semester right now, whereby I had to submit an assignment, but I was late, and the lecturer was like, that's not my problem, we should have done it. And I explained that I was having issues with connectivity, you know, and she was like, I also did the same module, I went through the same issues and everything, but you should have done your work in time. And I feel like if gender economics was taught in UKZN, maybe it would have made so much difference. And I am so angry for the fact that we don't have this module, and for the fact that our lecturers, they don't have empathy. Yeah, and just hearing everyone's ideas and hearing everyone's views, it just made me, like what Bonolo said, redefine feminism, you know, and understand more about it. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And that made me think, like, someone recently said to me, like, if you aren't angry, then you aren't paying attention, which really struck me, because there's just so many injustices happening in our classrooms, in economics faculties, in faculties in general, in universities as an institution. It's infuriating. And my hope is that we create these spaces like the one we're in now, where we kind of forge a new way forward in our own little way. I know that's a big task, but as bell hooks would say, you know, it's a hopeful kind of strategy.
I just want to say something about what, oh, sorry, Tando.
Busia, you can go ahead, and then Tando.
About what Yanda say, I feel for you, because what COVID has shown us, it's not that you should have had a gender whatever class. It's just our lecturers should have been taught differently, because a lot of the time when I look from my institution, they sort of, the new semester, they'd have what they're teaching and what are the rules of the class in COVID. And they're like, cameras on. And I'm like, crazy. You don't know where the heck I'm living, what the heck is going on. How dare you want me to have the camera on? And it is the people, so teaching is also like, so we economics students, but it's also the privilege that economics lecturers have. They're usually so out of touch with what's going on. So the people who write the papers in the top fives, you know, the American Journal, and the top fives are all like northern, nothing from the global south. But the people who write, they write about poverty and they write about whatever, but they're completely divorced from the whole process of what is actually going on. How dare you actually request that I have my camera on? I could have my abusive husband in the background. I could have whatever. I don't want to have my bloody camera on. That is as simple as that. So it is, even when we go into this new mixed blended learning thing, it's like there are certain things, I think Dikeledi was saying, like teaching is not, the architecture is the issue, but it's the whole, it's the whole thing. It's like what Charlotte and I were talking about, you bring your whole entire body to the class. So there are people who are living with a disability. How do I bring them into the class? There are people who are like, it's everything must be brought to that class. It's, and we must do better. And I think we must do better. So we can do everything, right? So the student in the class can do everything, but the person who's teaching me, or whatever, the head whatever they are, even that is like flat structure. But whoever is in charge of coordinating the course must actually believe in certain things and look at me in a certain way. So, I mean, if they be doing that top-down thing, they're also thinking that I do not have knowledge. So the interesting thing that Charlotte said is like, in her classes, there's a co-creation of knowledge. The students teach each other, the students have knowledge. So they're not empty, you know, an empty jar that you're pouring stuff into. They can have sort of their experience come into the class and teach, and it's this and nobody has ever co-created. At a PhD level, someone has got, but I had to wait that long for someone to think I had an opinion. You know, I had to, for the first time, I wrote a paper with a supervisor, and it was lovely. It was absolutely, because somebody thought I had something of value to say, and they weren't teaching at me, but we were working together. I'm working together with my supervisors on papers, which is something that I haven't had at all. But I like that idea, but they must believe that I have something before I can say, let's co-create and let's have something in me. It was a very interesting thing that students are not empty. They have stuff in there.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I'm gonna thank you for sharing, Busi. Tando?
Hi. So Busi covered some of the things that I was going to mention with regards to power. What COVID and this year has mostly uncovered is the control that teachers or mentors exert on their mentees and their learners. In that now with these online classes, a teacher would be like camera on, and if, like this one kid was complaining and saying he tried to plug his laptop in, and then the teacher was like, what are you doing? Your face must always be facing here. You know, there have been complaints about like what's this test writing online where you have to write with your test on, like doesn't make sense. Those kinds of things. So I'm just adding on to that. But mostly I think all these things that we're struggling with, they come from a place of reflection. We need to reflect a lot, and we need to, I think I'm losing my train of thought. We need reflection, and then also we need to be critical of how we engage in spaces. Because I think one of the things that we mentioned in my chat with Yanda was spaces that are engaging, as well as that foster creativity. But then it would seem that in order to be creative, you also have to be questioning of the things that you're learning in the spaces that you're in. And this whole conversation has shown us that questioning is wrong. Don't. There are jokes that go around that in your undergraduate years, just cram, pass your modules, and then you'll be able to innovate and work in postgraduate level. So I think what I would like to see in a more feminist space is one where we question power dynamics, where we are critical of the spaces that we're in. We need to be engaging, and then there also needs to be inclusion, because we're talking about all of these things, but then have we given power or have we given room to people of different abilities to come in and engage with us in these spaces? So I think those are some of the things. I really enjoyed Charlotte's lecture, because all the points that she raised are a summation of all the thoughts. The transformation, criticality, reflexivity, it's literally everything that we're asking for. So I really found that enjoyable.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And one of the things that really struck me after I left varsity, my first job out of varsity, was how I was expected to think critically, to engage the work critically. And I actually realized that I wasn't taught that. And critical thinking is a skill. It's something that has to be fostered and learned over time. And if we just taught in varsity to cram and to learn for the next exam and for the next test, it really doesn't get us anywhere. It didn't get me anywhere. I had to unlearn a lot and kind of relearn and re-experience the knowledge in a way that kind of brought my full self into it and my full like knowledge, brain into it. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Thando. What is the time, by the way? Holy crap, I'm so sorry. This conversation has been so interesting. I lost track of time. Do we have any more reflections before I hand over to Charlotte? Kind of, I see Asanda, your hand is up. Wonolo, your hand was up. Is it no longer up? Are you okay? Okay. Asanda, please. The floor is yours.
I totally agree with what you've just said about having to unlearn a lot. As I've been studying economics for the past, I think, 3 years. I mean, four years. And it's only in my postgrad that I'm able to challenge some of the thoughts that were instilled in us. And also I'd like to add on the power dynamics things, how it's harmful and silencing. I remember during the year I was trying to figure out a topic for my treatise, and I wanted to write on gender income disparity. But then I didn't continue with the topic because I was afraid of not getting a supervisor, because in my department it's male dominated, and there's not much interactions around gender economics, even with the female lecturers. You're not sure if that welcome and agree to pursue studies that are in gender economics that are feminist, because some of them view them as something that is destructive to the economics knowledge. So I wanted to add on that, and I feel like if maybe how the economics course was structured, maybe it had included gender studies, it included psychology, and all these other disciplines that connect with economics were included in our modules, instead of just teaching us macro econometrics, international economics, and all of that. Yeah.
And in many ways, the focus on like math in economics, I think, reflects kind of the kind of that kind of math is the most objective, most rational thing to kind of prove something. And yeah, I'm going to stop there because I know we're running out of time, and give the floor back to Charlotte to kind of respond to everyone's reflections. Thank you so much, everyone, for reflect. That was, yeah, I have chills.
Yes, thank you so much. I found today so restorative and inspiring. It's been real soul food to hear from really passionate people who are determined to make changes. And even if they're little changes, they can be hugely valuable. It's going to be a bit difficult to wrap up all of those amazing contributions and tie it up neatly with a bow on top. But there are just a few things which struck me. I think starting off with thinking about the logics of extraction that seem to permeate everything. What can I get out of this person, or what can I get from this situation? And that idea of extraction, which really impresses on me the need to find different ways of thinking about things, of relating to each other, different ways of being and approaching teaching and everything in our lives. Kind of what are we bringing to this situation, and how can we I don't know, bring life and flourishing, and how can we help everyone in this space reach their potentials? So that's really made me think. Thanks so much for that comment. I'm really interested in kind of critiquing the architectures of spaces that we see around us, and it seems so important to me to find ways to disrupt them, even in those traditional lecture theatres that we get. If we can get students into groups, looking at each other, collaborating, even if they have to sit on the steps or stand around in circles, just ways to get people moving around and disrupting those spaces, and somehow trying to shift those power dynamics, or kind of getting the lecturer. And sometimes if I'm in those lecture theatres, I try and just move around and listen to what my students are saying. I shouldn't really say my students, but I can't help it. Just to listen to what learners are saying and giving them different opportunities to contribute. I love the importance of thinking about inclusive spaces. That's so important. And I think just finding ways for the quieter voices to be heard, and that could involve using online tools to capture people's ideas, getting students to map out or draw their ideas, or work in small groups and just find ways for those small groups to contribute, because often you do get the more confident voices dominating in a room. So just exploring different ways to help build up confidence for those who are not quite so dominating. I love what someone said about sitting with students. Sometimes we're so focused on trying to fill up our sessions with as much stuff as possible, but sometimes it's just those quiet, reflective moments that we can build in, those pauses for thinking, and really deeply listening to what people have brought. I also want to talk a little bit about care. Above all, I think we have to come back to the idea of self-care. We're working in extremely challenging times, and I think it's so important for us all as learners or teachers to recognise that and acknowledge it, and make sure that we are practising self-care as much as we can. And I think it was Criticality who brought up these issues, but it sounds as though you're doing so much to care for your students, even though it doesn't feel like that. I think it is important to manage expectations about what you can and can't do, and you can't always carry the problems of 100 students with you, but you can kind of just do whatever small things you can just to make everything feel a little bit more human. And you can make sure students are aware of where they can go for support, because it can't always be you, especially if you already have lots of other caring responsibilities and really high workloads and difficult constraints and environments. So do just come back to this idea of self-care, and I think it includes being vulnerable as well. That can be a huge act of caring, just saying, well, none of us are feeling okay, and that's okay. How are we supposed to respond to this situation? Just making it okay not to be okay can be really important. And just, it sounds as though you're doing so much just to give your students as much flexibility as you possibly can. But we do have to recognise as well that teachers are operating in very kind of constraining, sometimes even violent and harmful systems, and they are just doing the best they can to survive as well. So I think ultimately it does come down to finding others to connect with and building solidarities and support systems, and that's one of the best ways forward to affect change from the ground up. There are a lot about our higher education systems that need to change, and it won't change overnight, But just being here today and listening to what all of you have to say does give me, again, coming back to the idea of hope, it just gives me so much hope that people are so passionate and concerned and caring and thinking so deeply and reflexively about their teaching and learning practices. So thanks so much for that. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Yeah, and I want to continue for us to kind of hold space for each other for as long as, oh my goodness, the sun is like right on my face. Yeah, I want to continue holding this space, as you say, building solidarity, and I do feel like we have created a space for that now here, and I want to thank everyone for sharing. And yeah, I'm so inspired, and I've learned so much from all of you. So thank you so much for coming and for participating. And I would like to offer for us to kind of reflect as we leave the room, as we leave this conversation, and the Google Doc, as I said, will always be open. So if new ideas come into your brain, if as you're reflecting and you're thinking through this conversation that we had today, please feel free to come back to the doc, share your thoughts, and hopefully we can continue building this solidarity after the festival too, because I think it's so important. And Charlotte too, I invite you to kind of be a part of that. Thank you so much for coming today. And for being part of this conversation. And I think we all learned so much from you. So yeah, I hope to see all of you tomorrow for our final session with each other. We are going to have a plenary with the whole REFA group as well. And tomorrow we'll be delving a little bit more into feminist political economy. We'll be thinking through the content of our economics curriculum. And I'm very excited to see you all there again. I'm so sad to end the session now, oh my goodness. But I have to. So yeah, let's all keep in touch, and let's stay in conversation as much as possible. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a good evening further.